From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Political observers were stunned. New census numbers required just over 7,000 people be shifted between Congressman Jim Langevin's district and Congressman David Cicilline's. But after going through the redistricting meat grinder, the new map goes much further, moving an astounding 125,000 people and taking 3 Republican-leaning towns out of Cicilline's district.
I think what's being done here is trying to put David Cicilline in the best position possible for re-election. And I think, they feel that by adding more sections of Providence, he will have a lot better chance to get re-elected.
The move has sparked an unusual tiff between Rhode Island's U.S. representatives. This week on the first half of Newsmakers, a good government group is demanding a halt to the process. Our guest, the executive director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. Then, a new novel inspired by the man who investigated this notorious wise guy, Frank Bobo Marapizzi. They Always Win tells the story of a young detective in the State Police Intelligence Unit busting mobsters in their heyday. Our guest for the second half of Newsmakers, novelist-in-chief of the Middletown Police Department, Anthony Pesare. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet and WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Tim.
John Marion, Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island. Thanks for joining us. John, I want to first give you some recognition. Your organization has been beating the drum well in advance, cautioning everyone about gerrymandering and that it was on the horizon, and then finally, in the 11th hour, everyone started listening. Last night, after an outcry over the last map, and we should point out this program is taped on a Friday morning, a new map was unveiled, and if we could show everyone that map. This is really the Providence area. The red line is the current district. The green area would be the new district, so you can see how it changes. A lot of lines going on there, and it's sort of hard to discern, but overall the headline is with the new map is that fewer people are sliding, and only 2 of the 3 Republican-leaning towns and congressmen are being shifted between the 2 districts.
Only 1, in fact.
Excuse me, only 1 is being changed. 2 are staying. Does this change anything from Common Cause Rhode Island's perspective? Are you still pushing for a halt or a pause in the process?
So this changes our opinion of what they're trying to do for the congressional maps. Certainly this is a much less offensive map that they've come out with. They're moving, as you pointed out, 2 fewer towns, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you move whole towns from one representative to another. Our call for a halt to this process, or pause really, has more to do with the data that's underneath these maps, because groups like ours, other groups in the state and around the country, quite frankly, that are interested in this process need some of the underlying information that hasn't been produced yet. And that really affects those 113 General Assembly seats quite dramatically, and the implications for minority representation.
I want to make that very clear to people. If I understand it right, and John, and you can correct me, we're paying the consultant, I believe, $700,000, taxpayers are, to do these maps and give us the information. And as Tim said, we're taping on a Friday. They're supposed to vote on the maps Monday in a couple of days, and we still don't have all the data that the taxpayers have ordered to understand the impact of these maps that'll be in effect for 10 years?
Yeah, so we still don't have one of the major data sets dealing with political data, and we still don't have at least 2 of the reports that he's supposed to deliver on racial.
Why? Is this nefarious, John?
Yeah.
It's not nefarious, it's more negligent. So
what is the difference?
The state was supposed to give the Census Bureau several years ago some political information that the Census Bureau would then merge with the census data, the actual enumeration from last year, and give back to us. That would have given us a head start in this process. 49 other states did that. Rhode Island didn't.
We're the only state that didn't do that?
I believe we're the only state that didn't fully participate.
Why would that be?
Supposedly it was to save money. That's the public statements that are being
$700,000 is a bargain?
So in return, we didn't pay at the front end to get it ready for the Census Bureau, so we're paying this consultant at the back end. Now, it slowed him down, so he hasn't been able to produce this. From what I understand, if he doesn't produce it, he doesn't charge. However, we think it's not about the money, it's about creating the good districts, And if we don't have that information, he can't create good districts. This commission can't.
How
force that.
confident are you now in the competence of what he's doing? I think Common Cause and you pointed out that this doesn't even reflect the new highway.
Yeah, so that map doesn't even show the shift in I-195. So you know, there are some questions about how good a job is happening here.
So let's go to what's being done in the districts. You know, but what people want to know is how political are these maps? Obviously, this is a political process, but in the congressional districts we've heard a lot about, but also talk about the General Assembly. How much is being done? Are they trying to kill off the Republican Party, what little is left of it? What are they doing?
Yeah, you know, people hear the term gerrymander, and when you think of the overall process here, there's two types of gerrymanders that can occur. Sometimes the parties can go after each other, right? And
like
they can try to
Texas,
basically, like in Texas, try to eliminate the advantage that the other party has. And sometimes they can just declare a truce and say, we're not going to go after the other party. So that's called an incumbent protection gerrymander. That's what we're really seeing in Rhode Island, at both levels. There's no war to eliminate the Republican Party, or there's no war to eliminate the Democratic Party. It's we keep our people, you keep your people. Let's leave each other alone.
I have a legal question about this, and I guess we'll turn to our resident legal expert. You know, as John points out, if people are being used as political pawns in this thing, and I say people as in residents, not just voters, they're being shifted back and forth to potentially protect an incumbent, could the Attorney General step in and declare the process illegal? Now, our Attorney General, of course, is a political figure. He's a Democrat. I'm sure he wouldn't do it, but could he?
Well, it would depend whether it fits within the parameters of the case law on voter dilution, which John just alluded to. The fact is that these cases are extremely difficult to challenge. The last successful ruling, although there was a settlement after that, was with the Richard Leach case, where Rocco Catroci hated Richard Leach. Leach was a renegade back in those days, and they moved Leach into Lila Sappin's lease area to bump off Leach. Leach successfully challenged that,
but that was
in federal court. 1982. And it was interesting because the Republicans, even though Leach was a Democrat, John Holmes used that to attack Rocco's robots, and he parlayed that into having more wins for the Republicans, saying, see how they're trying to game this against the people. But on a legal issue, it's really difficult, Tim, to challenge this, because courts consider it a political question. They believe in separation of powers and that the judiciary shouldn't interfere with the legislative judgment.
Has that come across the desk of Common Cause, the thought of filing some sort of suit on behalf of someone, or is that really not an option?
You know, I think after this is done and these have been passed by the Assembly, we will look, as will a lot of groups that have specific interests in whether it is urban minority representation or whether it's the political parties. I think a lot of groups are going to be looking at the final maps to try to make that judgment.
You know, stepping back from what we're talking about here, though, redistricting is a political process. Politicians always say that you can't take the politics out of politics, and some of them sort of laugh at your group, saying they're just being goody two-shoes. What would a good process look like to you? What would be different about this? You're going to have politicians in the end voting on the new districts, no matter what.
Yeah, you'll never take that final ability of the legislature to design its own districts away from them. But this commission that's doing this, there's 18 members, 12 of them are legislators themselves, have clear conflict of interest in drawing their own districts. There are states, Arizona, California, that have taken it away from the politicians themselves.
What do they do?
So they have an independent commission. 14,000 California citizens applied to be a member of the commission in California. 14,000 people knew that this is such an important process, they wanted to be a part of it.
Well, why don't we do that?
Because in order to create that commission, you would have to get the General Assembly to sign off.
You requested a pause. How likely is that? I mean, one would say this becomes the equivalent of all the last-minute votes that people do in the General Assembly, and they haven't read the bills. I mean, in a way, on Monday, aren't they going to allegedly vote on something and they don't have all that data that you talked about?
Yeah, I think we're going to see them
isn't it?
move right ahead. There is another step here, which we haven't talked about, which is that the Assembly then, sometime after January 15th, will vote on these. And they can be and have been amended before then. So the information could still trickle in, and this could be, changes could be made at the Assembly.
The consultant, as we pointed out at the top of the show here, is being paid a lot of money, $700,000 in tax dollars. There's free software out there, isn't there, that could do these maps? Why aren't we using that? Talk about that a little bit.
I think we're paying less for the technical expertise in some ways. We may have that within the state. The state planning department has people who can use computers like this. We're paying, I think, for the legal expertise and the ability of the consultant to sort of walk the state through this process and provide cover for sometimes gerrymanders.
Provide cover. I mean, that's kind of it here. It sounds a lot like we are paying a lot of money for a political puppet.
You know, yeah, I think
we should say he's been doing this job since 1982.
Yeah.
So he drew the Richard Leach map, right?
And so, you know, I think these consultants are essentially hired guns who go around to all the states, and all the states hire them, and there's only a handful of them, and they're very good at what they do, and they're very good at trying to avoid those lawsuits. So actually, the consultant we have here also did Illinois. Yesterday, a 3-judge federal panel in Illinois upheld the maps he drew in Illinois. So very good at preventing these suits.
Does any state use this software over a high-paid consultant, to your knowledge?
Florida is doing something different. Florida actually had programmers that work for the state of Florida create a program using Microsoft Silverlight that is up on the web, and people can go draw their own districts, and then the commission received those. And so it's a little different. Some local jurisdictions are definitely using free software.
I want to ask you one non-redistricting question. We reported on WPRI.com this morning that Engage Rhode Island, that high-profile advocacy group that pushed for the pension bill, spent more than $617,000 in October, November lobbying and promoting the bill. Now they're forming a PAC, a political action committee, to back candidates who supported it in next year's elections. So you cover campaign finance a lot. What do you make of that, and sort of what went on with the spending?
So it's actually very good that they've decided to create a PAC, because the trend nationally has been for groups not to create political action committees, but
why would that be?
Because the Citizens United decision 2 years ago sort of freed them to spend money in different ways, and groups like Crossroads, GPS, which is spending a lot of money just over the border against Elizabeth Warren, don't have to disclose their donors because of that. By creating a political action committee, you have to disclose where the money comes from, and you're limited in how much money you can give directly to candidates. And so it's actually a good thing. We have very strong PAC laws. There was actually a federal court challenge to them not too long ago that we weighed in and won. And so it's good that they're becoming a PAC, because we'll know where that money's coming from.
John, we have to go to a break very soon, but I did want to ask you back to redistricting. I think a lot of people were surprised that Congressman Jim Langevin's office didn't stay silent on this and sort of lashed out at a fellow Democrat. You know, for the foreseeable future, Congressman Langevin is safe. Why do you think he was outspoken on this? Do you think he was so amped up by the process on this?
You know, actually, if you go back to his life before being a congressman, he was Secretary of State, right? And he, in his role as Secretary of State,
ruffled some feathers at the General Assembly.
At the General Assembly by talking about the closed-door process. And I think the story is that they actually tried to move his office out of the building. They were so mad at him once, the Speaker. So you know, he's not afraid, typically in situations that involve sort of the insider moves, to call him out.
All right, John Marion, Executive Director from Common Cause Rhode Island. By the way, a lot of the news that I got from the redistricting process, I got through Twitter, and I did that by following John. I think your handle is @CommonCauseRI?
Yes.
There you go. Hopefully your Twitter's about to go up.
He will hit you up for a donation occasionally.
Yeah, just be warned about that. You're going to want to stick around for the second half. Great book called They Always Win, from a guy who knows a thing or two about organized crime. He's the chief from the Middletown Police Department. Anthony Pesare joins us next on Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, Arlene Violet, and WPRI.com reporter Ted Nisi. Our guest this week for the second half is Anthony Pesare. He's the chief of the Middletown Police Department, vice president of the Police Chiefs Association, spent 24 years with the Rhode Island State Police, and the author of the new book, they always win. Tony, congratulations.
Congratulations,
on this book. It's a great book.
Thank
We
you
really
very much,
enjoyed it.
and thank you for having me here today.
So let me get this straight. It's a novel about a young man of Italian-American heritage trying to make it into the elite state police intelligence unit during the heyday of the mob. That sounds oddly familiar. And
Someone might identify this book with me, but yeah, it is about the struggle of a young man, both professionally and personally, as he tries to establish himself as a mob investigator, establish himself personally with the people he works with, at the same time trying to investigate the mob during its heyday.
Well, it begs the question. In this book, you changed the names to protect the guilty here. Nicky Gemma, sounds a lot like Nicky Bianco. Jerry Angelino, Gennaro Angulo maybe. Eddie Laredo. I mean, Chief, that's only one consonant away from Eddie Laredo. Why a novel? Why not do the true story of what happened here? What was the process in your thinking?
Well, I thought a fictionalized version of this would give me more leeway to not only tell the story about those investigations, but add some other stories. You know, when police officers sit around, we always tell war stories, so to speak, and people say, you should write a book about it. So what I was able to do in using fiction is to weave in those other stories, those other investigations, while using those mob investigations as the base. So I'll leave it to the reader to draw the conclusions on who the people are, but I don't think you need to be a scientist or rocket scientist to figure out who these people are.
Tim went down the list of names, Colonel Smith, for example, Colonel Stone.
Yeah.
But I was curious, your lead character, the protagonist, is Gino
Right.
Peterson, and of course the mob family is Raimundi. So in the first few pages, there's like Gino Raimondi. Is that a Freudian slip?
No, it's Raimondi.
Yeah, I know. Did you afterwards say, oh, maybe I should change these names?
No, my basis for changing the character was that, well, you know, my father was Italian and my mother was Swedish, so what I did is sort of reverse that sort of thing, so that, you know, Gino being Italian of heritage was struggling to become part of the state police back in the 70s. So that was the reason that I chose that name.
Chief, for my generation of Rhode Islanders, you know, I was looking at the book, I was reading some background, and I saw a list of made members from '03, a reported list, and the youngest person on it was 56. And I'm always watching Tim come back from these hearings, and it looks like he went to a nursing home, you know, to do the indictments and everything. Are there young wise guys? Are there guys still coming up in the mob these days who are going to be, you know, I won't put any names in there, but, you know, the made members of the future?
Sure. I mean, there are going to be associates that are going to try to become made members. The problem that we've seen is that with the RICO indictments and the length of time that mobsters have to do, people aren't willing to take those chances anymore. And the other reason that we don't see up-and-coming young mobsters is this return to the old way of gangsters, relying on things like gambling and extortion and exacting a street tax. Those kinds of money makers that they've always been involved in is the reason that they're involved in those crimes. And so you see that amongst the older generation, that's their philosophy, and that's why you see when you do a raid that sometimes you see oxygen tanks and wheelchairs and that sort of thing. But I think for the young mobsters coming up, there's such a fear and such a danger of doing tremendous amount of time in prisons that they kind of shy away from it.
You know, but you're right that mobsters do a long amount of time if they get caught, and I interviewed you a couple of years ago when a guy named Frank Bobo Marapisi was walking out of prison after doing some 30 years for the gangland slaying of Richard Dickey Calley, something that you had investigated. He gets out, now he's back at the ACI, right? He's a defendant in a case, a state police case, a gambling ring. He's accused of extortion. He spent most of his adult life at the ACI, and now he's back behind bars. Are you surprised that he would come out and risk his freedom once again, allegedly?
No, I'm not surprised at all, because it's a way of life for him and for other people. I remember once my partner Lou Reale and I picked him up and were bringing him up to headquarters, and he said to us, every time I go to grab for the brass ring, something happens. And so I think it'll always be on his mind to be the head of the family. It'll always be on a lot of mobsters' mind. But unfortunately, they can't change the way they they've lived their lives.
Your book, They Always Win, obviously is a great snapshot of organized crime, but also it's an insight into the culture of the Rhode Island State Police. Right early in the book, there's this boxing incident that I believe is true, along with other boxing incidents, and of course the instructor screaming in the face of the young recruit, get up, you're never going to make it, and he keeps getting knocked down, your protagonist, etc. So you have tapped into, I guess, your experience at the State Police is pretty accurate, this book, about the other incidences as well, particularly the difficulty of Gino Peterson getting into the intelligence unit.
Exactly. I mean, what makes the State Police unique, obviously, one of the things is the State Police Training Academy and the culture that the State Police have. And so I tried to bring that out in the book. And that culture is what makes the State Police successful, especially when you have to battle organized crime and take on some, very difficult cases, political corruption cases and that sort of thing. So I did try to weave that through the book because it is a unique culture. It's different than other kinds of policing, and so I thought it was important.
So a political question. Every year the issue comes up about guns on police, on universities and college campuses. And I'm sure there'll be another outcry with Virginia Tech, etc. But yet in your book it correctly reflects the difficulties of getting through the academy, the screaming in the face of the recruiters to make sure they're not trigger happy, etc.
Exactly.
I mean, do you personally think that campus cops ought to have guns?
I think that any campus police officer who is in harm's way should be armed. I mean, Virginia Tech is a perfect example of that. And I would never want to be in a position to have to go down and investigate a campus police officer being hurt because they weren't properly armed. And so if they're in harm's way, absolutely, absolutely.
You're the Vice President of the Police Chiefs Association, as I pointed out, and your organization is launching a new initiative, an accreditation commission, to make sure that all departments are on the same page for policies and procedures. Talk a little bit about that. What kind of policies and procedures are we looking at?
What we've done is the Police Chiefs Association has decided that it was time for us to have uniform policies and procedures throughout the state for every police department. So we've modeled our program on the same program that nationally is known as CLEAR. It's a nationally accredited program. But CLEAR is very expensive, and so local police departments can't afford that. So we've joined with 24 other states that have their own in-state accreditation program, and to provide common policies and procedures for some of the hot topic items like police pursuits, use of force, bias-free police.
Was there new legislation that propelled your group to say, look, we got to get this done? Racial profiling was, of course, big in the headlines. Was there something that was paramount to make this happen?
No, it was a natural reaction to not having common policies and procedures. There are departments within the state of Rhode Island that belong to CLEAR, but others that don't. And so what we've seen is that, legislation would be introduced and then we would have to go up and testify either for or against it. We thought we'd be in a much better position if we developed our own policies and procedures based on national standards and be able to go to the legislature and say, look, we've addressed the issue of use of force, we've addressed the issue of eyewitness identification, and we've standardized those, and here's the police departments that have met those standards. And so we thought we'd be in a much better position to do that by forming an accreditation commission.
I wanted to ask you about Brendan Doherty. We all know Colonel Doherty, I still say, even though he's retired now. He was superintendent of the state police. Now he's a Republican candidate for Congress in the 1st District. I saw him last night, actually, at the redistricting hearing. But you knew him in a different role, and you've known him a long time. Who's the Brendan Doherty you know?
The Brendan Doherty I know was my first, when he first was transferred into the intelligence unit, he was my partner. So I got to know him firsthand. He is just a tremendously hard worker, a very honest person, a person that, because I was leaving the intelligence unit, I gave him all of my terrible cases.
He told me you used to make him spend Christmas and Thanksgiving with the wise guys you'd picked up, so you'd go home for the holiday, but he'd go in with turkey and stuffing.
He's a rookie, right?
Yeah, he's a rookie, and that's part of the culture of the state police, is that seniority prevails. So, of course, I took great advantage of him when he was on. So, and I'm assuming someday he'll probably be able to take advantage of me, but no, he's a good friend and a good person.
Later today, again, we tape on a Friday, 29 new state troopers will be sworn in to serve the state of Rhode Island. You were a trooper for 24 years. What is your advice to them?
My advice is to be true to themselves, to stay close to their families, because this is a very emotionally dangerous job, whether it's local or state police. And if you lose track of that, then that's when we see police officers get in trouble. So my advice to them is to rely on their training, but also to take some time themselves to spend time with their families and do things other than police work. And more importantly, I think, what was important for me as I went through the ranks is to associate your people with people who aren't involved in police work. Because you sometimes get a myopic view of the world if you hang around with police officers all the time. And so I think it's really important that you continue your education, and join clubs and be involved in things other than police work, so you're a more well-rounded police officer as a result of it.
Where can people buy the book?
The book is available at Island Books in Wyatt Square in Middletown, Rhode Island. It's also available on Amazon.com.
An electronic version, right? Get
Yes,
an e-reader?
Kindle and also...
Kindle! You're way up to date.
Good for you. And nothing says Merry Christmas, honey, like a book about the mob.
Thank you, Tim.
All right, our guest for the second half, Chief from the Middletown Police Department, Anthony Pesare. His new book is called They Always Win. If you missed any of it, you can catch it on our website, WPRI.com. For Ted Nisi, Arlene Violet, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.